and it's the home of the big red kangaroo, but also it is your home. And I've called upon the spirit people to let them know that we're here tonight to keep us safe, to bring the good spirits upon us all, and to send the bad spirits away. And it's important to do that because a welcome is about an invitation into a place, and I hope you feel invited here tonight. But I want to tell you a couple of things. So I needed somebody to come out, and that's Amanda Blair, our MC. So Amanda, are you there? Give her a round of applause.
Thanks. Okay.
So whilst Amanda's coming out alongside, I want to tell you about my people. How we understood the land and the environment so well that in some ways we did many things. And as you know, Australia is the driest continent in the world, and so therefore we had to be very clever about many things. And one of those things was to find water. Well, finding water was sometimes very difficult, but what our people knew, that there were certain creatures that held water inside them, and one of them was the frog. The frog would bury itself, fill itself with water in its belly, bury itself deep into the ground, and our people would dig these frogs up and basically use them as a water bottle to get some water. Now, Amanda, to help us with that, I want you to put your hand in here. Don't be afraid.
I haven't had an offer like that for a while, haven't
I know.
Okay,
Dig deep.
Oh.
It's going to be some sort of frog. Now, Amanda, we've got a frog here, but really, and it's got water in it, but you're going to need to get that water out. And the way you're going to do it is you're going to need a straw.
Oh.
Now, the thing is, Amanda, to get that water out of there, you have to go in hard and fast, and you have to go in places that you really don't want to go. But basically, you're going to have to go in its anus, and so you're going to have to stick that straw right in there, dig it deep until you hear a pop, and therefore, when you do, we'll get that water out. There we go. And as you can see, refreshed, cool. What a great way to have a drink, isn't it?
What a great way.
I think we should sell these water bottles after them. Give her a round of applause. I'll take that, Amanda. So as you can see, not so hard to get water when you know how. And Amanda really knows how. But anyway, I want to also share one final story before you really get into the great sharing and discussions around really, I suppose, climate and all those things, particularly around this heat wave that we have. I want to tell you the story about how our great elders were approached by modern man to ask them the knowledge and the wisdom that they knew about the land. And so they came to the community. And this modern man saw the great elders sitting around in a circle. And he approached them and he went up to modern man and he said, "Elder, can you please help us? We've got this climate change. We don't really know what to do. And we know your people have been living upon this land for tens of thousands of years. And we want your wisdom and knowledge." And the elder didn't respond. So he called out again. He said, "Elder, please tell us. We need to know this information because our climate is changing." And again, he ignored him. And so he took a different tack. He could see that the elder was doing something along with the rest of the people. And so he asked the great elder. He said, "Elder, what is it you're doing?" And the great elder responded. He said, "I'm making a cloak." He said, "But elder, I just told you our world's getting hotter and hotter. Why would you be making a cloak?" And so he picked up his cloak, this beautiful possum skin cloak that I've recently made, and he said, because what follows great heat is great cold. And our people won't be able to make these possum skin cloaks when the great cold comes, so we make them now. So what does that story tell us? It tells us many things. It tells us we have to be prepared. We have to understand the environment and how it changes, and we have to adapt. And that's important things to know. So I hope that when you hear this information and this knowledge today by all of these people, that you really take that information on board, utilise that information, share that information, and that all of us can have an environment that really allows us to be upon that environment. Because we don't own the land, it owns us. And it's important to recognise that, because when we look after it, it looks after us. So I say these words to you, my unjika, my ajika, nachu yukandayu, nachu yakandayu padnya do I do, which is simply let us walk, let us listen, let us sit, and let us observe the land. Let us do it together, let us do it in harmony, and do it as brothers and sisters. So my friends, I don't say goodbye because we don't have a word for goodbye. We only have a word called nakara, which means see you later. So see you later, and thank you.
Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Mickey O'Brien. He did a tremendous job, and water out of a frog's bottom doesn't actually taste too bad, for those of you that were wanting to know. Welcome to this magnificent event tonight. It's feeling hot, hot, hot. The first Resilient East regional community event, and this is of course hosted and delivered by the City of Adelaide. What is Resilient East? Resilient East is 8 councils working collaboratively together on climate change adaptation initiatives in partnership with the state government. These councils include the City of Adelaide, Burnside, Prospect, Norwood, Payneham and St Peters, Tea Tree Gully, Unley, Campbelltown City Council and the town of Walkerville. And I would like to thank many of the councillors from those councils that are here tonight, as are many of you residents in those suburbs. For over 7 years, Resilient East councils have been working together, mostly behind the scenes, to improve the resilience for our communities upon which we live, our assets and our infrastructure, to help us with local economies, natural environments, so they can better respond to the inevitable challenges and opportunities of climate change, because of course, as we all know, it is happening. I would just like to, while we're here tonight, acknowledge Resilience South, who started this event last year. They actually did this event down at Marion in 2018, and the event went on to win the 2018 Minister for Public Health Awards and the 2018 Resilient Australia Awards, because all of the audience walked away with a better understanding of what heat waves are, what climate change is, and how they can respond to that. So I think a round of applause for Resilience South. The event tonight will inform you, hopefully will shock you a little bit, and will prepare you for the inevitable. We are hoping to finish this event around 8:15 on stage at least, and then of course you're welcome to head out into the foyer there and hang around, talk to many of our expert panel members that should be out there, and also some of our tremendous stall holders that are out there as well. Of course, as you know, you guys have been to these events before. Normally it's incumbent upon the MC to talk about things like don't smoke in the venue. If you need to go to the toilet, just get up and go to the toilet. Don't hold on. That's always my particular favourite. And also to, in case of an emergency, I'm always supposed to say, follow the staff, and alarm will sound and please follow the staff. But tonight we've actually got the head of the SES here, so if anything goes wrong, for God's sake, follow him, because if he doesn't know what he's doing, we are all screwed. Shortly, we'll be bringing our panel up on stage, and then we will commence this extraordinary event where we have some of the most amazing statistics, and they're all real. The data that we are presenting to you tonight is real. But before we go there, let's also, while we're talking about real, have up on the stage the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, a woman who has done tremendous things, not only here in council, but right across Adelaide when it comes to climate change. She's right behind it. She's a member of the Premier's Climate Change Council. Please welcome warmly to the stage the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, Sandy Verschoor.
Thank you. Thank you, Uncle Mickey. Mani Napudni, Nyadlu, Tampandi, Nyaglu, Kaurna, Yatanga, Tikandi. Welcome to all. I also acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and acknowledge that they're of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and First Nations people that may be with us tonight. Thank you, Amanda, to my fellow mayors, of which there's a number of you here tonight. Great to see you. to my City of Adelaide councillors, local government CEOs, to Julia Grant, the Executive Director of Green Adelaide, to our excellent panel members who we will get to meet in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the City of Adelaide and the Resilient East Network, welcome to the Town Hall for tonight's heatwave scenario. It's wonderful to see that the Town Hall is filled so to the rafters, actually. I was going to say to the back, but actually there is up into the rafters as well for today's important discussion. And we'll be joined by eminent panellists from fields of business, industry, government, community and science, and I thank each and every one of them for their time and sharing their expertise with us. Our hot weather has already reached the levels predicted for 2030. We're living through this right now, and we've just endured 2 heat waves with temperature reaching 46.6 degrees on the western side of the city, and I think up to 47.4 degrees in Kent Town. That is an absolute record for our city. Heat waves kill more people than any other natural disaster in Australia, and we're moving into new territory with climate change. Heat waves are more intense, they're longer and geographically dispersed. And Adelaide just recorded its first month without any rain in 12 years. The last was in February 2007, and many of us remember the challenges of the millennium drought. Tonight's panel will be imagining what it will be like to live in Adelaide in 2025 if we continue down this pathway. The expertise and breadth of sector representatives on this panel demonstrates how important collaboration is to respond to such a complex problem. Our health, our electricity grids, the environment, businesses, tourism, events, and the delivery of services for all members of our community. To be climate resilient means working together to respond to climate change through reducing our carbon emissions and adapting to the already changing climate. Local and state government authorities want to ensure that our communities are prepared for heatwave and the other impacts of climate change. And Resilient East is our climate change adaptation partnership with the 7 other Eastern Adelaide councils that Amanda mentioned before. The City of Adelaide and Resilient East councils are committed to both future-proofing our communities and operations for changing climate, as well as reducing our carbon emissions to reduce our contribution to climate change. I'm pleased to announce that today's Resilient East's heat mapping was launched via an online heat mapping tool with the assistance of the Department of Environment. The heat maps will allow us all to make more informed decisions relating to urban planning, tree plantings and the health and well-being of our community, particularly vulnerable people. The City of Adelaide is working hard to reduce our emissions and support our community to prepare for changing climate by greening our cities, which reduce the heat sink effect, and we've increased our 2020 greening target to 1,500 new street trees, having already exceeded our initial target of 1,000. We provide financial incentives for our community to install solar, batteries and electric vehicle charging points. We've assisted our most vulnerable by installing solar on their 40 low-income or rental households, reducing electricity costs and carbon emissions. We understand that these are the people who are least likely to turn on air conditioning during extreme heat events due to the cost. We're implementing 100% renewable electricity for council buildings and facilities. We are increasing on-site renewable energy generation on our buildings and facilities by installing solar panels, reducing our electricity use by up to 9% a year. We're continually improving energy efficiency in our buildings and facilities, saving the organisation and the ratepayers of Adelaide over $460,000 per year. The Carbon Neutral Adelaide Partnership Program has over 160 organisations committed to working on reducing their emissions and improving energy efficiency. We're supporting sustainable events. We've eliminated single-use plastic straws from all council events and are working with events to reduce waste, save energy and make great experiences. The dangers of heat waves are real and present, and today's event aims to help us all be better prepared for them and to mitigate the risks. Together, we need to continue to reduce our carbon emissions. so that the worst impacts of climate change will be avoided while preparing for the climate and the changes that are already happening. Once again, it is fantastic to see so many people here today, and I really appreciate you taking your time to attend. I hope you continue to be engaged with the important work of Resilient East and all the organisations represented here on the. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and tremendous initiatives the Council have already undertaken to help our planet. Right, tonight, of course, as the Lord Mayor just mentioned, we are all here to be engaged and to learn a little bit more and to work out what we can actually do to help the situation. Some of you have already participated in online surveys. We will show you the results of those surveys a little bit later on in the night, but right now you've been handed an orange card when you came in. We want you on one side. If you're sitting on it, just sort of lift yourself up and pick it out from down there. On one side, we want you to fill it out before the event, and the other side, we want you to fill it out after the event. So if you're one of those eager beavers, straight A students who's already filled it in, you've done the wrong thing. If you can just fill out one side, that would be fantastic. And in fact, what we're going to do is we bring our panel members up on stage now. For those of you that haven't done it, we're going to give you a little bit of time to do so. So I think we've got a little bit of background music. Fill out that form, please. The side that says fill out before the event. Okay, looks like we're done. There is also on your chair some SES pens as well. Please take them home with you tonight. They are a gift from the SES. Now let's introduce our esteemed panel, shall we? And we are so lucky to have many of these people with us here tonight because they are all extremely busy, but they're all here, like you're here, because they care. They really care, and they want us to all do things to make the world a better place. First up, in no specific order at all. This is not an order of importance, so I don't want any of you to get the wrong idea. We have from Business SA, Anthony Penney. He's the Executive Director, Industry and Government Engagement. He is responsible for policy and advocacy as well as international trade. Through advocacy with all levels of government on behalf of the business community, he and his team strive to create the best and lowest cost operating environment, allowing SA businesses to create a vibrant economy. Ladies and gents, can you please put your hands together for Anthony Penney? Next up, we have a man who is familiar to many of us through the television screens. He is often on TV talking about the things that matter most, and that is emergencies. They do a great job at the State Emergency Service, I think you'll all agree. And Chris Beattie is, of course, the Chief Executive Officer. He is also on South Australia's State Emergency Management Committee. If something goes wrong in a crisis, my God, he is the man that's right there in the thick of it. He is leading a national, or the SASES is leading a national push to develop and implement a new harmonised heatwave warning service across all jurisdictions. So that's a tremendous thing that we'll talk to him more about. So ladies and gents, please put your hands together for Chris Beattie. Our next guest is a magnificent man. He was on the panel last year, did a great job, and I was thinking of him actually all day as the temperature rose and rose and rose on 46.6. He is the Manager of Emergency Management of SA Power Networks. Frank Kriski is his name. He's an electrical engineer with over 35 years' experience in the electricity industry. Some of his projects have included designing and implementing SA Power Networks Network Operations Centre and the development and ongoing refinement of SA Power Networks bushfire risk management programs. And didn't they do a great job when it was really hot? Frank, a round of applause for you, please. Hitaf Rashid is our next panellist. She has headed up Events South Australia, the events arm of the South Australian Tourism Commission since 2008. She is responsible for many of our big events that we all attend and all love here in South Australia. The Santos Tour Down Under, Superloop Adelaide 500, Tasting Australia, Bridgestone World Solar Challenge, Adelaide Fashion Festival and the National Pharmacies Christmas Pageant. And no one loves middle-aged men in lycra as much as Hitaf Rashid. So please, a round of applause for Hitaf. Again, a voice that's very familiar to us, John Nan from the oh, sorry, what was that?
Story of my life.
What was that? Oh, I'm doing you. Oh, sorry.
What about me?
Oh my God, I missed you. How can I miss you? You're the largest man in the world. All right. Our next panellist, sorry about that, is of course the wonderful Tim Jarvis. I think you've got an AM there as well. He is an environmental scientist, author, adventurer and public speaker. He is the founder and leader of 25-0, a project that uses dramatic images of melting equatorial glaciers and stories of people being affected by their decline to show climate change, engage new people in the issues and fund climate change projects. In his spare time, he dresses up as Shackleton and sails around the South Pole. He wears seal skins and he also has appalling taste in music. Sister Sledge is a particular favourite of his. So ladies and gents, please put your hands together for Tim Jarvis. John Nan, sorry, we are at you now. He joined the Bureau in 1980. He has extended South Australian services to include embedded fire and emergency services and targeted briefings for industry. He has also developed the Bureau's National Heatwave Service and is collaborating with international heatwave service partners. There's not many more people on this earth that know more about heatwaves than John Nan, so please welcome him to the panel. Next up, we have Ken Long. Ken has he is the chairperson of the Adelaide Sustainable Building Network, ASBN, and sustainability consultant at D2 Consulting. He has a deep passion for the creation of built environments which enable a positive quality of life. He currently chairs the Adelaide Sustainable Building Network and works as a sustainability consultant at D2 Consulting, an Adelaide-based studio delivering sustainable solutions in the built environment. Ken, a round of applause. Next up, we have Associate Professor Nicola Spuria. She is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer and Public Health Physician and a paediatrician from SA Health. Associate Professor Spuria, did I say it right the first time? I did, it's okay. Has a long-standing interest in improving the health of populations with a special interest in the well-being of children and young people. She has worked across a wide range of health areas in the department, including childhood injury prevention, environmental toxicology, obesity prevention, we can have a chat later, medical leadership and Aboriginal health. So please welcome her to the panel. A lot of great experience there. And finally, A rose with no thorns on either side. Rose Rhodes, who is the chair of the Australian Division Advisory Board of the Australian Red Cross. We all love the Red Cross and worship the work that you do, Rose. She is both chair of the SA Divisional Advisory Board and a volunteer with the emergency services at Red Cross. She has extensive experience as a response and recovery volunteer. She has been deployed to numerous emergency events in South Australia and interstate, and has participated in the emergency response to bushfires, floods and cyclones. She is also a Telecross Ready volunteer and supports people who are vulnerable during extreme heat when the service is activated. A huge round of applause for you, Rose. Now, this is how we're working tonight, everyone. We are going to give you a scenario, and this is true data skipped forward to 2025 of what Adelaide is going to be looking like and what Adelaide is going to be feeling like. Our panellists will be asked to comment on various questions that I give them, but you also will have the opportunity to ask our panellists questions. On your chair again is a random piece of paper, and you can just write down, if you have a killer question for any of our panellists, please write down your question on that piece of paper as the question hits your head, because if you're anything like me, you'll forget it in a few moments after that. Write it on the piece of paper, and then if you can hand it up the aisle to the person sitting on the aisle. I'm sorry, all of you aisle seaters there, but you're going to have to be responsible for those pieces of paper. We have volunteers in the room who will be collecting those pieces of paper. If you just dangle them delicately out into the aisles, the volunteers will just silently whisk up and take them away, and then we do have an opportunity at the end of the session to answer many of those questions. Volunteers, can we just have a bit of a wave from the volunteers? There they are in the back of the room. Please, the volunteers are ready to go with those questions. We also want you to turn your phones to silent if you can. However, we do want you to spread this event on social media and share this event as widely as you possibly can. Our hashtag for the night is Feeling Hot 2019. Tim Jarvis's personal one is just feeling hot all the time, but Feeling Hot 2019. To Feeling Hot, I can say that, he's a friend. Feeling Hot 2019 is, of course, our hashtag for tonight, so please use that as much as possible. We now have a short video, and they say that out of the mouths of babes come a lot of truth and a lot of honesty, and none more so than this young woman you're about to see now. That was her little quote. That was her quote then. Sorry, no video, just the quote. Okay, this film now is a video that has been produced and put together by Tim Jarvis himself. It's a time-lapse video. Yeah. Perhaps you can explain it to us, Tim.
Sister Sledge, I'm still getting over that. Is the microphone? Yeah. This is the largest ice cap in the world at the equator. It's in Africa. And the original shot was 1906, showing the mountain covered in ice. And you've got a time lapse moving forward showing a 90% reduction in that ice cap through to 2016. And I beamed into the climate change talks in Paris with an image of that ice melt along with many other images, just trying to show the extent of the change that I've witnessed. The difficulty with climate change is you can't see greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, so you need a proxy to make the issue tangible enough for people to see. And this is just one of many things I've been using as a way of showing that change.
And what does that actually mean for us though, Tim? I mean, you can show this video and you can show that the ice cap is actually melting, but how does that affect us here in Adelaide?
Well, you know, climate change is, by way of a definition, it's the accelerated warming of the planet as a result of human activity, mainly land use change and emitting fossil fuels into the atmosphere. And to quote a scientific principle, there's a scientific principle called the Goldilocks principle. It says Venus is too hot, Mars is too cold, and Earth is just right. And it's the fact that Venus's temperature is 460 degrees, Mars is minus 55, and Earth's is around 15 degrees Celsius because we have an atmosphere that contains greenhouse gas. So we need greenhouse gas to a point to make life tenable on the planet. The problem is that as a result of, as I say, land use change and burning fossil fuels at 10,000 times the rate at which they are formed, we've added too much greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is now too efficient in terms of its ability to absorb and retain heat. Now, we now have the highest levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere we've had for several million years as a result of our activity, and it's having exactly the effect that it's designed to have, which is to help retain heat, and that's giving rise to a lot of the weather changes we're starting to see happening in recent times. Scientists have been reluctant to say that until now, but I think we're now starting to see the rubber hitting the road in terms of the effects that climate change are having on accentuating the kind of weather that we're experiencing. In terms of the effects for Adelaide, well, Adelaide is the driest city and the driest inhabited continent in the world. Antarctica, of course, is far drier. We've had some places with no precipitation for 150,000 years, but 49 days is pretty bad if you live in a city like Adelaide. And we're right in the crosshairs of the climate change crisis, both in terms of our agriculture, our livability of our cities, the price of our electricity, and many, many other issues. And it's really important for us to set a positive example, both here in South Australia and as a country more generally, as to what can be done. Even though we're only the 13th largest emitter in the world, everyone is watching to see what a developed country like Australia will actually do when they have the ability to make the changes, but maybe choose not to. So the world is watching, and we have to set a positive example.
Thank you, Tim. Our next slide in front of us here, this is climate change impacts and projection for eastern Adelaide, which is the area that we're talking about tonight. More frequent, long-running and intense heat waves, more extreme fire days, and less rain but more intense storms and flooding. John, perhaps you can talk to us about this particular slide. What does it actually mean?
Okay, so it's well established that we have heated by a degree globally, and what we're seeing is that the more energy you add into the atmosphere, when you move into the natural extremes, those extremes will go further than they used to. I could point to a classic, the North Queensland floods right now, a tropical monsoon that's produced nearly 2 metres of rain. Think of it in one location through Townsville and the like. I think Townsville itself is about up to 1.8 metres of rain. Previous record for a week was 800 and something or other millimetres. So when we get our extremes, we're going to go harder than we used to in the past. An example shown in the graph that you can see there is showing you the trend in temperature extremes that we're seeing in our climate record. So this is our observed state of the atmosphere. So you can see there what we have recorded and tracked. And so you can see that there is an observable increase in the extremes as we go forward. And me and my colleagues at the moment, year on year we keep on finding ourselves breaking records at remarkable rates. So I'm almost getting sick of it, because basically we just find ourselves writing new records all the time.
Can I ask, a lot of people were throwing around, when we hit the 46.6 degree day a couple of weeks ago, a lot of people were throwing around, oh, but we've lived through that in 1938. This is all garbage, this global warming business. You know, we've already had those temperatures. Can you just explain to us, I mean, we did have those temperatures in 1938. 39, sorry. I love your statistical brain and my forgetful one. So 39. So, you know, how do you answer those people when they say there's no such thing as global warming because we had those temperatures back then?
Well, unfortunately, people like to grab a hold of figures and use them according to their desired outcomes without considering or wishing to disregard the science. Back in 39, we recorded there was an instrument that is no longer used because the instrument allowed radiation to get inside the box in which the temperature was being observed. And any time you get direct radiation into a surface, it will heat that surface, and then it will warm the thermometer inside. So that back then we had from our original observational record right through to 39 and beyond. We kept that instrument for a while. We were being good scientists. We were comparing it with the Stevenson screen exposure, where you can't get any sun inside of it, and it is today's standard. So we had these instruments side by side. And unfortunately, the advertiser back then published the glacier stand temperatures, and they are just numbers from an irrelevant instrument. But they were higher numbers than the Stevenson screen. But as it would turn out, we had the Stevenson screen back then, and we were comparing numbers that sat alongside that glacier screen at the same time. So if you care for the science, you'll recognise that we actually have broken the record. In fact, it's a 160-year record because the glacier stand extended the record back further, and it is comparable. So we know that we have an all-time record. I'd love to publish a certificate for you that survived Adelaide's highest ever temperature, but that's the difficulty that we experience. The science is clear. I'm afraid for some people it is rocket science and they don't want to understand.
What about the impact of more variable rainfall on our lifestyles? Because that's our next slide here too. We're going to a slide that looks at all of our rainfall areas. Obviously, again, we're in a strange time at the moment where we're all looking at the terrible devastation of the floods right up north. But what does that mean on, how does that impact on Adelaide as well? I mean, certainly from a business perspective, that's going to impact on what we eat and how we live. I mean, there's a whole raft of things. One of you, who wants to answer that one? Anthony, would you like to step forward with that?
Well, I am by no means, as you'll be able to tell by my accent, I'm Canadian, so anything over 25 degrees I consider a heat wave. I struggle in heat. I've got snowman in my DNA. But specifically with this, in terms of reduced rainfall, look at what we eat and the impact that has. So less pastoral land or less grass being grown, less crops, less wool, more irrigation needed for water, if assuming there is sufficient water for that, it means more expensive goods on our table and in our fridges.
If I can just add to that, I first came out to Australia to work as a scientist for the Murray-Darling Basin Commission, which is why I'm here in Adelaide at the end of the system, so to speak. And a 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature will result in a 9% drop in the amount of rainfall in the Murray-Darling Basin. 2 degrees, roughly double that. We are at the end of that system, and we are the ones who are going to suffer, I can tell you.
John, would you like to add anything?
Another thing to consider there, because we've seen the impacts of climate change already in southwest Australia, where some 25, 30 years ago they suffered a 20% drop. So they've had that experience already in southwest Australia. And what they've experienced is a loss of runoff because the soils are not being wet frequently enough, and when it does rain, it just gets absorbed, setting itself up to let water run into reservoir. So Perth now effectively must have desal to have enough water. It has stopped relying upon its previous catchments to actually give it water. So that's probably our future, because we'll have to learn to adapt to that, that we'll become increasingly reliant upon our technology to produce water.
Chris, what about that slide for you? How does that affect you? I mean, I know there was a lot of talk on Monday last week just about the dry land and big winds and lots of heat. You know, obviously you're on full alert the last couple of weeks.
Well, certainly the Country Fire Service has been on alert, but I think in terms of the variable rainfall, whilst there may be an overall reduction in the future, one of the concerns that my agent around likely increased flooding, flash flooding, or intense and severe events that will occur with a more energetic atmosphere. Adelaide's designed on a floodplain. Our runoff and rainfall calculations continue to be revised every 5-10 years or so, and the stormwater infrastructure across the city into the future is simply going to have to be upgraded, and there needs to be an uplift to be able to deal with that sort of change in intensity of rainfall events.
Many of the councillors are already doing great things. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Thank you for that. Now we are going to move forward because this here is a really interesting map. For the last week and a half, the City of Adelaide have had an open consultation online where people could mark on a map places of metropolitan Adelaide where they go to keep cool during the day or night during a heat wave and where they avoid on a hot day or night. Now, it might seem obvious, but there are a lot of blue markers for keeping cool along the beach and in some of the hills or at parks and swimming pools. But to me, when I saw this, I just went, what about the people in the city? Where have they actually gone to? So, Ken, I know when I'm hot, the last thing I want to do is drive into a city or be anywhere near a city because of all of the concrete. I want to get to the beach or under a tree. Why is it that our cities are so hot? Is it just because of the density of concrete and the sparseness of trees and grass?
Yeah, you took away my thunder and pretty much answered the question. Well, there's been a lot of studies done across Australia's cities, and they have seen that a lot of the urban centres are, especially during heat waves, can be nearly 5 to 7 degrees hotter than it would be out in the suburbs, or even from densely in terms of areas that have trees or parklands of that matter. I don't know if has everyone here heard of the urban heat highland effect? We've got a few, so we'll try to make it a little bit more visual. Everyone here has seen a road that is just, you can actually see the heat coming off the road, yeah?
Yeah.
If you can almost take, if you've seen Inception, you've seen the roads actually come up around you, and then they come from the other way around. If you can almost visualize that, and that's pretty much like our cities, but then pretty much the heat radiating out of those roads are all around you, three-dimensionally. And essentially our cities become, just capture all that heat. And even at night, there's no relief. So out in the suburbs or your a little bit more rural areas, you might have a little bit of relief because the temperature will drop. You'll have potentially, if you're lucky, you'll have some airflow. But in the cities, just because of the built infrastructure around you, it's just radiating all that heat throughout the night. So you actually don't have a lot of respite. Now, there's a lot of different ways to combat that, but we'll kind of go in that later on. But essentially, it will come down to how do we think about the built infrastructure to be able to allow for shaded areas or some respite, or it will come down into some emergency protocol of how do we actually open up centers, strategically open up centers or public places that will be running to allow the public to go into them during these hot times.
Is Adelaide a little bit more buffeted from some of that heat because of our giant band of paranoid parkland that Colonel Light set out for us? 2 cannon shots, everyone. 2 cannon shots, you're safe. Does that help us?
It does. And interestingly enough, when the parklands get irrigated during the night time, it actually helps a lot more. But you also have to think about how much can that actually penetrate into the city.
Yeah.
So we'll also kind of see that a lot of more expensive properties might be toward the edges of the city. That's not only for the amenity. You actually get better performing ambient temperatures around that area as well, if you think about it. So if we want to strategically think about our cities, how do we actually put in that green infrastructure furthermore throughout, and just not in our parklands or in our city squares.
Okay, thank you. We are now going to start our scenario. It gets very exciting from here on in. Not to say that you weren't very exciting, Ken, you were very exciting indeed, but let's start with our scenario. Now, this is real data, everyone. What you're about to see, the first time I saw it last year, it absolutely shocked me because I couldn't believe that we were heading for these sorts of temperatures. So we are now skipping forward to November 2024. We're all getting ready for Christmas. We're out buying the ham. Heatwaves getting ready for the tour down under and picking out more lycra. The Bureau of Meteorology has prepared its summer outlook, and Eastern Adelaide is preparing for this.
Hello, and welcome to the Bureau's Climate and Water Outlook for January to March 2025. An El Niño is now well established across the tropical Pacific Ocean. El Niños are generally associated with warmer and drier conditions over Australia, particularly during summer, with an increased chance of extreme temperatures. Now, every El Niño is different, and climate models suggest that this particular event will continue to be strong and last until at least autumn. This means that impacts over Australia are likely to be stronger than during previous El Niños. Parts of South Australia and Victoria have experienced well below average rainfall for this time of year. This has meant early harvesting of wheat crops. Sustained dry conditions in the South Australian Murray Lands and into Western Victoria has also seen grass fires start early, impacting livestock and property. Summer heat has arrived early as well in parts of southeastern Australia. Adelaide's average maximum temperature for November was 4 degrees above average, with December conditions expected to be at least 1 to 2 degrees warmer than average as well. With El Niño firmly established in the Pacific Ocean, warmer and drier conditions are likely for much of the country, particularly in the south and the southeast. In terms of temperature, daytime and nighttime temperatures are likely to remain well above average for southern and southeastern Australia. So in summary, 2025 is likely to start much warmer than average for southeastern Australia, so please keep an eye out for severe weather warnings in the coming weeks and months.
So here we are, skipping forward to the 3rd of February 2025, and our heatwave begins.
Online, on DAB digital radio, and on 1395 AM. Talking Adelaide. This is Adelaide's 5AA.
Good evening. South Australians are being urged to take care this week with a run of temperatures forecast to trigger heatwave conditions. Temperatures are set to soar into the 40s, with the Bureau saying there is no immediate relief in sight. Today's expected top is 35, with a minimum low temperature of 26. And for the remainder of the week, the temps will be 40, 42, 43, 44, 43 and 44, with the minimum overnight temperatures remaining in the mid-30s. Public schools are due to recommence after the summer break today, but due to hot weather policy, the department is only keeping schools open until 12 p.m. on days where the temp will exceed 38. This is causing havoc for families and businesses across the state. Authorities warning people to show precaution and to stay indoors and be hydrated. A Code Red plan has been issued by authorities to provide assistance to hundreds of homeless people across the state.
Okay, a Code Red has been activated. Chris, what do you do when a Code Red is being activated?
The state has a number of arrangements in place to assist the community during extreme heat waves. Code Red is a protocol that's activated by the Department of Human Services and provides additional outreach and support to homeless people across the state. People sleeping rough are vulnerable to extreme temperatures, and so through NGO partners in particular, like the Hutt Street Centre, Wesley Care Uniting, those types of services provide extended services to people who are sleeping rough or to homeless people that are seeking shelter during these conditions.
Rose, what happens when you have a Code Red alert? What do you do at the Red Cross?
With Red Cross, when the heat wave has been declared, the South Australia Department of Human Services will request that we activate our Telecross Ready, whereby we ring people who have been referred to us through a range of agencies, such as their carers or RDNS, and we make daily calls, and sometimes 3 times a day, to ensure that they are okay. But if we did not receive an answer from them, we continue to ring them through a period, wait half an hour and ring again. And within 3 calls, if they didn't answer, we will be activating an emergency, such as calling for an ambulance. And believe me, in the last few weeks of heat wave, we have activated Telecross Ready for a number of times, and we have been able to save quite a number of people's lives, and they managed to get them to hospital on time.
And Nicola, that's something that obviously you have to be thinking about. When a Code Red is activated, what happens within the Department of Health?
Yes, so there's two areas that we would be looking at. The first, obviously, if we're expecting to have more people turn up to our emergency departments and there are more there's more ambulance call-outs, obviously the hospital needs to be ready to deal with that influx of patients. So we do have a system, we have heat plans that we put in place to make sure that we have a look at how many beds are already occupied in our hospitals, in our public hospitals. We have a look at how full our emergency departments are. We try and make adjustments within that system. Obviously that can be quite complicated, and look to put on the additional staff that we might need for that period of time. And so, looking at, as Rose said, at the past couple of weeks with those heat days, just to give you a bit of an example, I've got the numbers here. We had 224 extra ambulance call-outs over those 3 days. We had 152 presentations to hospital that were directly related to heat problems, and an extra 53 admissions, which are all directly related to heat. So, if that's what we had this period of time, if I'm looking at those figures up there and thinking it's very little time for people to cool down, and vulnerable people in our community, elderly people, people with chronic conditions who are on medications that can be influenced by the heat, we would be expecting definitely to see more people present to our emergency departments.
Could we be doing this a bit better though? Could we be decreasing those numbers by some of our messages that we give out? I know, Chris, I know you want to respond to this question. Are we a bit flippant when it comes to heat waves? We have lovely shots on the news of bikini bodies down in Glenelg and people pouring ice buckets over their head and all having a whale of a time. But it is actually serious. As the Lord Mayor said, this kills more people than any other natural disaster that we have. Are we too flippant?
Can I jump in here? Yes. So there's two things that I mentioned to start with that SA Health would be doing. One is definitely looking at our hospital system and how prepared we are. But the other thing is I have a foot in public health, and we take very seriously the messaging that we provide to the public, because there's actually very simple things that people can do to prevent the effect of heat. And those things include drinking more water, staying cool, checking up on your relatives and friends, and particularly elderly people. And if people heed those messages, we know that they work. And we've got excellent scientists in our department who have looked at the numbers. And in 2009, we had over 500 ambulance call-outs. Now in the 2014 heat wave, so that is more recent, with our messaging, we had more than half that. We only had 200 plus, so that we know if people take their own individual precautions, it can definitely make a huge difference.
Chris?
I think that's exactly right. And although there is a frustration across all agencies about the temptation to trivialise heatwave warnings, and as we've seen in recent media, an almost flippant approach to the way it's publicised through the use of imagery and the like. There is no doubt that the messaging from health and emergency services is getting some cut through, and the study that Nicola mentioned examined the effectiveness of South Australia's heatwave warning service that was introduced following the 2009 heatwave event. And there is absolutely no doubt that the number of ambulance movements, cardiac ambulance movements in particular, ED presentations and admissions was reduced between those two events, which were very, very similar in intensity and duration. Having said that, all-cause mortality remained the same. In fact, there were more fatalities from the 2014 event than there were from the 2009 event. And so that highlights the challenge of heatwave response and the fragmentation of impact across the community, and the real need to engender a community response to try and drive down the life loss from these events into the future.
Frank? Yes, John?
Just a brief one. I think it's not just incumbent upon the agencies that we see here today to actually make a difference. I would make an observation that I saw a change this summer in Sydney. A Channel 7 crew, camera crew, travelled in an ambulance during the heatwave. And they captured images of people attending people in distress. And the thing is, heat waves are well known as the silent killer, mainly because visually they don't capture the scenes that we are stimulated by. So this was a strategy, maybe we don't think of it as ambulance chasing, but actually a way of capturing it.
No, that's great. Frank, when there's a code red, there's also a code red in your house, no doubt, going, holy hell, please make sure that everything stays on. It did when it was 46.6, which was tremendous. But how do you deal with that now? And are you putting into place now more programs, more support, so that when this weather hits in 2025, we are better prepared? I mean, if those overnight temperatures aren't going down below the mid-30s, that's a hell of a lot of air conditioners.
Those sort of temperatures certainly, as we were saying, it has an effect on humans. It certainly has an effect on our equipment. So as much as we aim to reduce the consequence on our equipment, things still do fail. So what we aim to do when we have a scenario like that is be ready for the potential for fuses to blow and equipment to fail. So that's a sort of a reactionary thing. So we work on a reactionary plan. In terms of what are we doing in the future when temperatures keep going up? Well, I guess it's a whole of community response whereby, as the Mayor was saying before, there are things that could be done to perhaps improve energy efficiency and therefore reduce the demand on the electricity grid. And we can do things in that regard and reduce the overall demand. But South Australia does have a very peaky demand, so we obviously can do certain things about it, but in terms of equipment, it's going to be stressed under those sort of temperatures if the demand on that equipment is high too.
Hitav, can I ask you, in our last heatwave event, and obviously heatwave events like this coming up into the future, it's also at a time in South Australia where we've got a lot of tourists here. You're running a massive event that gets global coverage and does amazing things for the state of South Australia. How did you respond to our heat, and how will you be responding to our heat in 2025?
Well, I've looked at those dates and we finished 2 weeks ago and we had a perfect 28-degree week, so I was pretty excited. But assuming this is the week we have, and we've had to deal with it a couple of years straight, unfortunately. Last year we had to cancel our public ride, the Challenge Tour, and tell 5,000 people they weren't allowed to ride in the public ride because of the heat. And this year we had a 41 and 42-degree day, and so the things we're thinking about, the things we're talking about, and I'm looking at this now, we think about all of our stakeholders, we think about our commercial stakeholders, we think about, sponsors, we think about councils, we think about all the people that have invested in the event, broadcast, all those sorts of things, so we're thinking about all those things. But most of all, we're thinking about health and the well-being of the riders, but more importantly, the volunteers, the public, the people that are working, the council workers, the people that are out on the roads delivering this event. So we're thinking about all of those things, and the things we're thinking about are, what are we doing with race routes? Is it going to be catastrophic fire conditions? What is our messaging like? Are we lining up with SES and SA Health, who are putting out messaging, and we've got a ride going on with professional riders? How are the teams feeling? All of these things are going on consistently.
Can you be insured against weather? Because, that's obviously potentially going to cost the state a lot of money if you put out all of this infrastructure for a big event and at the 11th hour you have to pull it.
Well, you could until last year, and then we cancelled something. No, seriously, getting insurance is harder for major events, and I know that it's it's probably putting people out of business. Major events is insurance due to heat, because if you're cancelling and you have to refund, most businesses can't cope with that. We're the government, we probably can cope with that, but equally it is getting very hard to insure against that. We insure only for our public ride, the Challenge Tour, and this year, because we had cancelled last year and we hadn't ever cancelled before, it became very difficult and very expensive to cancel to ensure against cancellation.
And it would be easy to say, oh, well, you can shift it to another month, but as John has alluded to, we are going to have much more unpredictable temperatures, so where do you move it to, and do we see a day where we start to cancel these big events?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, naturally we're in the summer months, we're January, February, March, but we run Tasting Australia, and so last year we had 2 weather conditions we dealt with. We had the Santos Tour Down Under where we cancelled the Challenge Tour, the public ride, and we had the Tasting Australia where we actually shut down Victoria Square because of another weather condition which was about winds, 80 to 90 kilometre winds, which we felt made the site unsafe, so we shut down for that day.
Anthony, what was the impact on the heat wave a few weeks ago, and also in 2025? Are businesses prepared in Adelaide?
So
are you using these learnings to prepare better?
Sure. So for a week in that week in 2025, it's dead of winter in Canada, so I'm hopping on a plane and going back and sitting in the snow. But more seriously, let's helicopter out for a second and look at the impact and the drag of extreme weather on the economy. So there's a number of research that's been done. This is very well documented. Ivy League University in the States looked at 64 automobile plants over a 10-year period in the States. And what they found was any severe weather, it could be wind, snow, rain, etc., led to about a 1.5% reduction in productivity. In terms of heat, when there was 6 days of over 35 degrees, it led to an 8% reduction in productivity. Garment manufacturer in India, every degree Celsius over 25, production drops by roughly 3%. Now, if we consider the economy and we look at the 3 Ps of sustaining and growing economy, population, how many people you actually have to consume and work, productivity, how many widgets you actually produce, and then participation, how many people or how many widgets can someone produce in any set time. So just by those figures right there, you can see a drain in the productivity of those industries and those businesses. A little bit closer to home, the 2014 heat wave in Melbourne, 4 days over 40 degrees. Melbourne City Council looked at businesses, 10% reduction in revenue, about $34, $37 million that those businesses didn't bring into the till. Closer to home, in the 46-degree day that occurred just recently, Great Cafe in the Business SA building, Whistle and Flute, they shut at 1:30. So you've got roughly 5 to 6 hours. They're not trading. People aren't working. People aren't getting paid. Suppliers aren't delivering. And then the flow-on impact to the overall economy. Now, in saying that, Wallace Cinemas, anything over 35 degrees, they get a 25% uptake in patronage. But that's just one small industry. You look at retail, hospitality. If you have a restaurant or a cafe, no one's going to sit outside. I certainly wouldn't, and I imagine most people here wouldn't. Anything over 40 degrees, even 35 is pushing it. So some businesses install misters, and that makes a little bit of a difference. But once you get up into that extreme range, no matter how much mist you have, you just don't want to be sitting outside.
Tim, can I ask you, you perform on pretty much a global stage. You're often away internationally giving talks at conferences and so forth about global warming. Is economics playing as important part in this argument or this debate as it should when you look at things like business? Are our global leaders thinking about this?
Not to the extent they should be. I think you've got to put these things into perspective. I've been along to 2 of the United Nations conferences where, to great media fanfare, an announcement was made that $10 billion had been set aside for the Green Climate Fund to allegedly solve climate change and decarbonise the world. And I think when you look at the total size of the global economy, which is $85 trillion US, you realise that the $10 billion is 1/8,500th of the total global economy, and a pretty trivial amount of money, regardless of how much media spin you put on that. So my argument would be that even at the most senior level, which allegedly is the United Nations, we are not taking this issue seriously. Australians have $2.5 trillion in their superannuation funds. We have 250 times the amount of money in our superannuation pots that the United Nations has to solve the most intractable problem facing us globally. I would suggest we're not really taking it very seriously.
I would tend to agree. Let's move on now, if we can.
Could I just
Yes,
throw-
you can, John.
I wouldn't mind throwing in a slightly different perspective, and it's pertinent considering what the banks are doing right now. There is a legal opinion in Australia that company directors are now legally liable if they're not considering climate change and disclosing that climate change risk to their shareholders. Of course, that's their primary responsibility most of the time. And it would turn out that most of our finance that flows into the banks comes out of Europe. Similarly so, America. And they're now attaching financial penalties to lack of disclosure of climate change risk, both financial, physical, and some other aspect. But the thing is, the legal opinion is very clear now, and company directors are having to take it into account. Technically, they can go to jail if they don't take it into account. So I think there's a big move in business, and that's actually a good news story, and one that will actually flow down to every accountant and every local business that you know of, because their loans are going to be affected.
On that point, if you don't mind, Amanda, we did a survey there right before Christmas looking at what SME's opinion is on climate change, energy policy, the environment, what have you. And the qualitative feedback, the comments that came through, it was probably one of the most engaged surveys we've ever put out. And I'll share some statistics for it with you. 69% of businesses felt human activity has led to climate change. 85% said that it's moderately to extremely important, and most of those were extremely important, that all sides of politics agreed to sensibly reduce carbon emissions. 61% felt that the federal government should absolutely continue to commit to its Paris Agreement, and this is the one that'll bake your noodle. 61% of businesses believe that consumers expect them as a business to reduce their carbon emissions. So it is coming. Businesses are getting on board because customers are pushing it and demanding it.
And that's the way we're going to get real change. Let's move, because I know you want to. You're all sweaty now. Let's move to week 2, because it gets even sweatier.
Online, on DAB Digital Radio, and on 1395 AM. Talking Adelaide. This is Adelaide's 5AA.
Good evening. South Australians are being urged to exercise extreme caution as the heatwave conditions extend into a second week. The Bureau of Meteorology is currently forecasting 44 for Monday and Tuesday, before a slight drop in temps to 38 and 36 on Wednesday and Thursday. However, temperatures are set to rise again on the weekend and will reach into the mid-40s. The extreme heat's putting unprecedented load demand on electricity sources, and consumers are being asked to switch off whatever appliances are not absolutely required. For those without air conditioning, authorities suggest heading to places where there are large industrial air conditioners, such as shopping centres, libraries and other council-run buildings. The RSPCA is calling on pet owners to keep pets inside, out of the sun and well hydrated. Native wildlife is also suffering heat stress, with the Department of Environment reporting the death of 200 endangered yellow-tailed black cockatoos and hundreds of flying foxes housed in the Botanic Gardens.
So Ken, I've never seen more movies in my life during this week. I'm constantly going to the movies. I'm going gold class and I'm eating a choc top every time that I go, as are most South Australians. Are our buildings able to cope with this? You know, we spoke before about, and you said how people flock to public buildings. We just heard it in the news bulletin, go to a public building. Can our public buildings hold us all? Can they manage in these temperatures?
That question is, there's a little bit of nuance in that question. So if you were going to ask can they actually handle the load, a lot of these buildings are meant to, they're designed to be able to take upon a lot of populations, especially public buildings. They have worst case scenarios sort of worked out. However, and then they have the mechanical systems or the AC systems designed to suit that load. The weird part about that is it's the double-edged sword, right? Because if perhaps we continue to rely on fossil fuels for energy production, then that kind of actually goes into climate change. I guess it's a little bit of a different dynamic in South Australia with the grid becoming a lot more green. Then we're getting our power source for more renewable energy. However, in terms of coping with that load in public spaces, these AC units should be able to run. However, you also have a situation where if it continues to be at peak temperatures, very extreme temperatures, then these units can actually fail. And what happens when these public institutions or these buildings actually have the ACs fail? Because at the moment, a lot of, especially public buildings, they're not really designed to suit without the AC. We've actually become addicted to having mechanical ventilation. So it's kind of like this, the reason why I'm saying it's a nuanced kind of question is because, yes, they're designed to deal with it in terms of technology, but then if that technology is not there to utilize, then we're in a situation that we're in emergency areas. And this doesn't only flow from our public buildings, but it will also go into also our domestic life, where if we do have systems that are supposed to perform, and then they don't perform at these extreme temperatures, then all of a sudden you need plan B. And I don't think a lot of people at this moment today are having that plan B. Now, if we forecast before, maybe we do start coming up with those plans. It's like, if something fails, where do we go? If this, let's just say the movie theater or the public library, our state library opens up its doors, but then their systems fail, then what is their plan B to make sure that they're coordinating with the right agencies?
Is it safe to suggest that we used to build houses a lot better and a lot smarter than we do now? That now when we're planning our media room and our rumpus room and our great room and our outdoor kitchen, we're not really giving too much of a stuff about where the light's coming from or where the sun's coming from?
Inherently, you had to think a little bit more with the, I guess you can say, nature's patterns, that we were forced to work with nature's patterns before. And modern technology has given us the ability to forget a lot about that. Now, the more responsible thing to do going forward is potentially to create buildings from the get-go that might be considering our natural patterns a little bit more, so then we can actually cope in these situations without the technology. That being said, in terms of making sure we're taking care of a lot of people across different spectrums of our society, I think technology will always play a part of that, and we'll have to think strategically about how to include those in our built environment, whether it's on a specific building or even looking wider along in our cities.
Best case scenario, do we want to put in place now in 2019 plans to make sure that everyone has to build better and has to build smarter? If you could have your ideal scenario, is that what we need to do to get real change?
Yes. Our current, the way that our development kind of system currently works is they're actually incentivized to meet code minimum standard, which essentially translates to what's the product that you can put out without legally being sued, or the lowest margin for that. So you do need to improve standards. That being said, currently, on a national way, our building codes are being progressed. They are realizing that this is an issue. And even released today was a paper by COAG, was just trying to showcase that they are actually creating a trajectory of better energy efficiency in all buildings across Australia by 2030.
Yes, John.
I'd love to get this answer from Ken myself, because my understanding of the building code in terms of efficiency, as I see it at the moment, is really building a European vulnerability into our community, because it seems to be almost like how best to retain heat in the buildings that we're building. So the efficiency code seems to be how well we're insulated and how we can keep that core going. It's not built around how you could naturally ventilate or cool other than by using mechanical air conditioning. So if I reflect upon what I've seen in the European data, and for instance, the French have about a 15% penetration of air conditioning, so they are the test case, if you will, with their extreme conditions that they've experienced, that they saw 15,000 people die in 2003. If we had a power failure with the built infrastructure that we have today, I wonder what vulnerability we would expose.
Pretty bad, I'd imagine. Frank, what do you think about the way we build now, and in your dream scenario for 2025, have we all got a big stonking battery in our house?
The electricity industry, it's certainly true to say it's going through a metamorphosis that it hasn't seen since the creation of the electricity industry. Once upon a time, it used to be a big generator at Torrens Island supplying energy into the grid, and we would take electricity off that grid. But now we've got what we call distributed energy resources. So people have got batteries. The challenge that we have as an industry, in which we're working through at the moment, is the incorporation and the integration of those distributed energy resources, including batteries and solar panels, into a grid that was designed for a one-way transmission of energy. We, as I said, as an industry, are working through the mechanics of that. One of the ways of thinking about it, if we get it wrong, is that if everyone decided to leave their house at the same time and got in their car and got on the road, we'd have a congestion of cars. It's a bit like that with electricity. So we've got to be careful how we manage all of these batteries discharging at the same time, or all these solar panels putting energy into the grid at the same time. These are some of the challenges we face, but face them we must, because those sort of temperatures that we're looking at would certainly put stress on the big generators and certainly on infrastructure in general.
Rose, can I ask you a question? Sunday's the 16th of February 2025 is the 14th day of our heat wave, where the temperature hasn't dropped below the 30s overnight, which is horrendous. The temperature reaches 48.1 on the Sunday, I think that is there on the slide. How are you coping at the Red Cross? Do you have enough volunteers, or have they all collapsed too?
In fact, we actually get people, encourage them to be prepared well before that. So throughout the year, when it's even in winter, we are actually giving talks to communities to get themselves prepared for all hazards. And the hazards also include heat wave. So while the messaging in the media tell people to drink plenty of water, wear light clothing, or perhaps go to a shopping center, sometimes perhaps they need to plan a bit more about shopping early when it's not too hot and keeping cool in the heat of the day. There's also, it's important for people to get connected and to really look after each other, because as I think one of our members said, heat wave is a silent killer. It's actually not in your face. You can't actually see like a bushfire or a flood. So therefore, people get very complacent, or we manage, this is a sunburned country. But it's really important for people to be prepared. Get connected. What I'm talking about is making sure people look at the forecast, plan their day, plan their activities. And when we talk about vulnerable people, who are older people, younger people, people with medical condition, but if we do have a power outage, everybody is vulnerable. So I guess what I'm also getting people to think about is have access readily available, emergency phone numbers, contact people if you're not feeling well. So we're sending those messages throughout the year.
Anthony, can I ask you from a business perspective, with these temperatures, do we have to actually look at the hours that we're open? Do we have to move to a more European system where perhaps we all go home and have a nap in the afternoon? That would be such a good thing.
Um,
But
um,
quite seriously, like, is that where we need to head? Because no one is going shopping, let me tell you, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it's 45 degrees.
I'm all for having a nap in the afternoon. But seriously, when it's that hot, and look at the safety-sensitive industries where people are out and about. Hataf mentioned about external events. You think you hop on a flight and you've got people loading the undercarriage of an aircraft, baggage handlers. Anyone that's out and facing that heat will absolutely have to be reduced hours. And then that's going to impact the productivity of that business and then what they're capable of. So this flows straight through to the economy, which is why it is so crucially important that it gets addressed.
Let's move on
just,
now.
Probably just further to that, and to your point about volunteers dropping off the perch, there is this sort of fragmented impact on workforces, both paid and volunteer, during these types of events. And certainly the emergency services sector, our volunteers and the Country Fire Service volunteers and MFS firefighters will be turning out to day-to-day emergencies, road crashes, fires and the like. And these will be trying conditions, and we know in different industries there's a massive increase in reported workplace injuries, lost time injuries from these events. So for the utilities, Frank, it's 600-700% increase in injury rates during these events, and there's this really difficult to manage and fragmented impact across the business community, government sectors and the volunteer sectors, which we'll all be trying to cope with, particularly into week 2 of this event.
That stat that I gave you earlier with the automobile example, the scientific study that they did in the States, they were manufacturing inside a controlled environment, and yet they still had an 8% reduction in productivity. You figure, how does that work? Well, you're at home, air conditioner's not working, it's too hot, you don't get a good night's sleep, the kids are up crying because they can't settle, your delivery trucks start to stall, break down, and that's what contributed to that 8%. So everyone gets impacted.
Nicola, I've got a statistic here too that says this is exactly what happens in 2025. Extreme heat causes bleeding of bitumen on older roads and traffic signal failure, which obviously is a huge safety concern for those ambulances that are bringing the patients into your hospital.
Yes, so I mean, we've talked about some of the health effects, and we have direct heat-related health problems. But we also see after a heat event, if we look back at the data, we also see increases in strokes, heart attacks, and problems with people breathing and respiratory problems. So there's actually an impact, not just a direct heat, people collapsing with heat exhaustion or heat stroke, but actually an increase in these other forms of morbidity or disease. And you've just brought up another example of injury. The other thing that we are expecting to see in the future, and we have been seeing, is an increase in food-borne illnesses, so people getting gastro from food infections, because when it's hot, it's very difficult to make sure that the food hygiene is up to scratch. And particularly, I said to my son yesterday, can you please make sure you put your lunchbox in the fridge at school, and please don't leave that ham and cheese wrap out in the sun. So there are those sorts of infections as well that we will be seeing. And the other thing that hasn't been mentioned is when you've got changes in temperature across a nation, and you've got that climate change, is that we will be seeing other emerging infections such as those carried by mosquitoes, such as dengue and Ross River. We don't have malaria in Australia, and I don't know what it's going to be like in the future, but we're certainly very aware of these new and emerging infections. So just a few other medical or health issues that we can predict we'll see in the future.
Ron Hitaf, I can't imagine that there's many people looking at the weather maps in Adelaide going, I'm going to come to Adelaide for the weekend because it's 48.1, so it's really going to affect our tourism economy too.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if it's forecast well out, it would definitely turn people coming off, definitely turn people off participating. I think if it happens whilst people have already arrived or it's short term, it might help the economy. It might actually, people aren't they might be spending more money because they're inside, they're in the movie theatres, they're in the pubs. they're in the cafes, they're trying to keep cool and they're spending some money, but certainly those long-term forecasts, and I have no doubt they have impact. If you have year-on-year long-term heat conditions, and we've had them, you wonder about whether that impacts people turning away, not coming to South Australia for events, or not coming to South Australia in certain periods of the year.
Absolutely. Let's move on to week 3, shall we?
Online, on DAB Digital Radio and on 1395 AM. Talking Adelaide. This is Adelaide's 5AA.
Good evening. Yesterday, temperatures in Adelaide hit 48.1 degrees, setting a new heat record for an Australian capital city, as what is now being called the Great Heatwave of 2025 heads into the third week. SA Health is still experiencing record admissions due to heat-related illnesses and is urging us all to continue to show extreme caution. Relief is in sight, with the Bureau forecasting the heatwave to come to an end by the weekend. However, this will be replaced by a series of slow-moving thunderstorms travelling east across the state. The Bureau says thunderstorms are expected to initially produce dry lightning, which could trigger bushfires across the Mount Lofty ranges. This will be followed by heavy winds and rainfall in some areas, and rainfall totals of over 50 mils in an hour in southern Adelaide could lead to localised flooding. Police are urging the community to remain vigilant during this period and keep an eye out for suspicious behaviour. In other news, Justin Timberlake has just launched a new clothing line.
So after the heat comes the storm. So, Frank, is this an absolute nightmare for you?
A nightmare that keeps repeating, yeah. Groundhog Day. Yeah, it is. It can be. Clearly, it's a common occurrence. The thing that happens before the rain comes is that elevated wind conditions, and one of the things that we are particularly concerned about is bushfires. Those dramatic changes in wind after a prolonged drought, as we saw in Victoria in 2009, are a significant concern for us as a utility. We have strategies to deal with those sort of conditions. They're not very pleasant in regard we may have to switch supply off if conditions get too problematic. But once we get past that, certainly trees over power lines will definitely lead to prolonged restoration time.
Tim, can I ask you, do people think about these storms when they think of climate change, again when you're talking globally, or do people just think about us getting hotter?
I think they just think that everything is just a steady increase in temperature. I mean, we've had recent statements from the esteemed President of the United States about, that climate change isn't real because they've got some cold weather. And evidently, the broad trajectory of the planet is heating up, but of course this gives rise to changes in wind patterns and ocean currents, and you're getting very irregular weather in places that you're not accustomed to getting it. And we are dealing with climate change, as the term suggests. The broad trajectory of the temperature is going up, but of course you are getting changes that both the ecosystems of the planet and people can't adapt to. Not quickly enough, anyway.
And Chris, how's this affecting you now? You've had all this heat and now you've got rain.
Well, I think the emergency services sector's well and truly been affected over the last couple of weeks. All agencies would be at extreme levels of preparedness. The State Emergency Centre would be activated. The dry lightning that came through with the change would have kept Country Fire Service and our firefighters in Department of Environment and Water extremely busy. The change itself, once it impacts on Greater Metropolitan Adelaide in particular, we start to see trees down all over the place, significant infrastructure impacts, road infrastructure, power infrastructure. People in the room only need to think back to 2014 when we had the change come through after the heat wave, and the eastern suburbs were a complete mess for weeks. So we'll have first responders extremely busy, stretched to the limit. There will be significant transport disruptions with roads closed due to power lines being downed and trees downed, and parts of the city will no doubt grind to a standstill.
Well, it's all looking good, isn't it? So much to look forward to. We've got some questions from the floor. I'll just ask this one. This is a health question. This one to you, Nicola. Would we finish schools at midday and send children out into heat, or keep schools open later? What do you think we should do? And the rest of you perhaps could contribute to that too.
Yes, I was a little bit concerned when I heard about the children being sent home early, because of course that will mean that parents have to go home as well to be looking after them. It might be more sensible to be thinking of how to keep those children cool in the school system. Of course, many schools were built without air conditioning, and I certainly remember trying to do Year 12 myself many years ago and finding that my calculator wouldn't work because the temperature was going to be over 30 degrees. So fortunately many schools now do have air conditioning, but not all. So I can't speak on behalf of the Education Department, but it would certainly be worth considering putting in place things that would keep the kids cool. Now, we've talked about air conditioning, but there are other ways of cooling the body down. So using cool flannels, for example, using fans, running through sprinklers, all of these sorts of things do help keep the body cool. And the reason why we tell people to drink is because the main way of keeping our bodies cool naturally is through sweating. So if you lose sweat, you're losing fluid from your body, you have to replace that by drinking. We're lucky that most places do have air conditioning. Many people have it in their homes, but there are other ways, perhaps more old-fashioned ways of keeping cool.
Can I ask you, Ken, a question? We've got some questions coming from the floor here about how can we increase green canopy cover in the CBD, and another question saying, does planting a tree out the front of your house make a difference? Does it?
For sure. That being said, I don't think it's as, especially in a society where we are connected to each other, we have shared infrastructure and things of that nature. Getting more coverage, tree coverage, that's really going to come down to, I think, the leadership in regards to what councils actually provide, and actually making that a goal for them. If perhaps you don't have a plan to actually increase tree coverage, or how do we strategically look at, through potentially the heat mapping and things of that nature, how do we strategically place different reserves or green infrastructure to help us out there? That planning our regular citizens can't do. Yes, they can plant a tree outside, but what happens when council sprays it and it dies on the street path? What happens when it actually starts to grow a little bit too big and it's starting to make an impact on our roads? So there are these multiple levels of it in terms of how do we roll out a more greener city that has better amenity and things of that nature, but it really has to be done in a strategic way. So I would encourage a lot of our citizens that if this is something that you want to see, then try to put pressure on a lot of decision makers for that, because that's public realm, and that's really going to be coming down to our councils.
John, you're leaning forward.
I just thought I might throw in a little bit of physics that might help. It's only in the sense of understanding that heat waves are actually exacerbated by dry soils. You can probably get in the order of a 6-degree difference between surfaces that are actually moist enough to be evaporatively cooling compared to a bone dry surface that doesn't have any capacity left to do any evaporative cooling. In other words, it becomes the equivalent of pavement. It heats and contributes to the atmosphere. So if you're actually strategic and careful, you can actually prepare ahead of a well-forecast heat event, small advertisement, and actually consider whether you actually want to introduce water into the environment in a strategic way. So there are lots and lots of places for long-term planning, but there are also lots and lots of room for really short-term strategies that actually can contribute to a more livable space.
Tim? Sorry, Tim.
Sorry,
No, whoever.
I just want to add really quickly is that although when I'm saying like out on the footpath and things like that, that has a lot to do with public realm and council. There is a lot of decisions that people can make on their own properties, or builders or developers can do for what they're trying to sell. But then a lot of that will come down to Australians also like big homes, or we're getting very dense. So how do we actually reduce the amount of hardscape? How do we introduce more green infrastructure or planted areas, or once again, how do we actually create space where nature can thrive with our cities and the infrastructure that we need? Sorry, Tim.
And looking at too, just one thing that I learnt last time I did this event, that the fake grass, which all looks wonderful, and of course you don't mow it and it's all very convenient, but that's actually, is it 18% hotter than concrete, or it's hotter than bitumen? It's actually a really hot surface, and it's probably something that shouldn't be used around the home.
If I could, it's actually worth considering when you're considering the viability of bowling greens, and they put in a hard surface because it's a great idea at the time for maintenance. But in fact, you've lost a huge capacity to actually have a cooling source in the community. So these things you need to consider.
Yeah, and I agree with all those comments, and I also think, you know, green spaces are good in that they reduce the urban heat effect, the heat island effect, but also they slow water down, and it's very important. You know, cities are an unnatural environment. There's a lot of very sealed surfaces, and when rain falls, it rapidly gets transported to the ocean, where it actually causes a lot of toxic shock on coastal environments that are not designed to receive large flushes of fresh water so quickly, like the mangroves in the Barker Inlet, to give one example locally. And I think, you know, to make us more climate resilient into the future, the more we can slow the water down, the more we recharge the aquifers that lie beneath our cities that provide us with the groundwater we use. And that's good news too in terms of climate resilience. But you only do that by slowing the water down, and that means having more green spaces.
And also good design.
Great design. I've got a really interesting question here. I don't know who to put it to. Do lifestyle changes, e.g. diet, vegetarian, vegan, plastic-free, bicycles over cars, etc., make much of a positive difference towards climate change? Well,
yeah.
Obesity, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, we always think in public health that the things that would make a huge difference for our rates of obesity, which is a major risk factor and driver for diabetes and cardiovascular disease, which, as many of you know, are on the increase, quite dramatic increase. All of the things that we would advise people to do in terms of lifestyle change have very positive impacts on climate as well. I don't know if I can quantify it, but certainly if people are using active transport, you know, cycling to work, trying to reduce the use of the car, eating more vegetables, please, all of you, eat more vegetables. It's very good for you. It will not do you any harm at all, and is potentially good for the planet as well. So it may be that Tim might be able to add more to that in terms of quantifiable effect, but it's certainly going to be good for each and every one of you.
The answer is we can make a big difference. Everything from voting for political parties that believe in climate change, through to investing our superannuation more responsibly, but all the way through to whether we are vegetarian or whether I've just turned vegetarian, in fact, very recently, and feel a lot better for it. Couldn't quite live with the fact that Jay Bolsonaro, who wants to now open up Amazon logging to the beef industry, I just couldn't quite reconcile eating beef with that recent political development, so I've gone vegetarian as a moral decision. We can make a big difference. Eating vegetarian saves probably 4 tonnes of CO2 from you per year being put into the atmosphere. 39% of Australia's carbon footprint comes from heating, lighting and cooling buildings. How we choose to do that as individuals also makes a very large difference. About 20% of Australia's carbon footprint comes from transport. How we choose to get around, again, has a very big impact. Australia has one of the highest per capita emissions of CO2 in the world, we're sitting around 25 tonnes. US is around 20 tonnes per person, so we're higher than the US, which is nothing to be particularly proud of. And it's up to us, I think, to set a positive example by trying to reduce that if we can. Again, it's about the example we set as much as it is the total amount of emissions we save.
I'm going to ask each and every one of you on the panel now for your takeaway point for the night, the thing that our guests can take away with them and implement some changes in their life. So what is the one point that you would like to raise that you think people can do to help reduce the risk from climate change impacts or from heat waves in their home, their work or via their advocacy? Rose, I'll start with you.
My takeaway message is to be prepared. So get yourself prepared now. Red Cross actually have a great Get Prepared app that you could download free. So if you could download that, it actually does assist you in preparing for all hazards. But there's one little thing I was asked to do. There is a Climate Ready Forum on Saturday the 30th of March. So if you are interested in going, it's at the joinery in Adelaide. It's climatereadyforum.eventbrite.com.au. It's out in the foyer for those of you who have seen it. It's there.
Great, thank you, Rose. Nicola?
I've already talked a lot about checking on elderly relatives and those that are vulnerable. So what I'd like my message to be is, if you'd like some help working out how much fluid to drink, have a look at our website, because checking the colour of your urine is very handy.
There you are. We'll all rush home to do that tonight. Yep. Thank you. Can't wait. Drunken, water from a frog's bum, and now I'm going to check my own wee. Thanks, Nicola. Okay, now to you, Ken. What is it?
I would encourage a lot of people in this room, whether you're a citizen or a decision maker or any of in between, to ask for better outcomes from the beginning. And then if you ask that question, maybe that becomes a chain reaction of considering what are the different things that we can do? How can we design things better systems, better infrastructure, better economy? I think too much we allow the low bar to be our standard, and we are in a privileged country, for sure, but if you don't ask for better outcomes, you never get it. So ask for better, and this is where it ties back to sustainability. You're asking for better outcomes for yourself, for health, and for the environment.
Exactly. John?
Okay, my take home is choose to understand heat waves. Heat waves exist on a spectrum like every other hazard that we have. They are low intensity heat waves 85% of the time. That lends itself to your normal experience. That's where you're adapted. That's why we say we live in a hot country. The last 15% of heat waves we have in our climate record are the ones we forget. Every time we come across something painful, we generally lose that memory very quickly because it hurt. So the last 15% of the heat wave, we map them, pale yellow for low intensity, orange for the ones that will damage vulnerable people, and red for when you're all up for it.
Thank you. Tim?
With an issue like climate change, and not wanting to badly paraphrase Mahatma Gandhi, but be the change that you want to see. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. We can all make a big difference collectively.
Thank you. Well done. Hitaf?
I was going to say something similar about the people in this room. What I take from this, and there's been some great conversation and discussion, is that the only way there'll be change is if everyone asks for it. But from my personal point of view, have a plan. Have a personal plan, have a professional plan, because that's what we have to do in major events. We have to have a plan to prepare for every situation. I think personally you should have one as well.
Thank you. Frank?
In the electricity industry, we're trying to make sure that, because we know how critical electricity is to people's lives, and we are aiming to mitigate the risk of that network failing, even under extreme circumstances. But the take home really has to be that, particularly particularly vulnerable when you've got those very hot temperatures. Power can actually still go off. A car can run off the road and hit a stobie pole, and all of a sudden you're without power, despite all of our best efforts to try and keep power ticking over. So I think everyone on the panel here has talked about being prepared. It's a community response that we're looking at in those circumstances. Be resilient. We've heard about maybe having ways of staying cool without power, and that's probably the take home, to be conscious of that possibility.
Thank you. Chris?
One of the reasons I get up in the morning and trundle off to work is to work with the emergency services sector to reduce life loss, suffering and injuries, to reduce property loss and environmental damage from emergency events. And one of the real challenges around heat waves is there's no hazard to combat per se, and so the take-home message from me is that it really does rely on a integrated and coordinated whole of community response, and every individual has a role to play, not only to take care of themselves and keep themselves and their families safe, but to keep their workplaces safe and to keep the community safe by checking on their neighbours, friends and the vulnerable during these events, so that we can all get through the other end and come out the other side.
Anthony?
It's hard to follow such a noble piece from Chris on that one. For the businesses in the room, be prepared, have your business continuity plan. Know what you can and can't do if things do fall through the floor. We're all individuals. What can't businesses live without? Customers. Let your business, whether it's the business owner, social media, the old-fashioned letter, let them know what's important to you. What do you value? And if they don't respond to that, vote with your feet.
Thank you. We know that councils weren't represented tonight on the panel, but we just wanted to take a few moments now to let you know of some of the initiatives that councils are putting in place already to be prepared for 2025. Firstly, this is all through Resilient East. So tonight we launched an online heat mapping, which you can access through the brand new Resilient East website, which is www.resilienteast.com, and the map will enable councils to make more informed decisions regarding urban planning, tree planting and the use of materials and surfaces to minimise urban and heat islands. The heat maps are available for any member of the public to access and zoom down to their street and house, go online and have a play. So they are a great thing that Resilient East are doing. This is one a lot of you, we were talking about, Tim, you mentioned stormwater. This is great. They have been working on water sensitive design initiatives to increase water capture on site, which can be used to improve soil moisture. John, you spoke about that. Green local areas and remove pollutants. So I think that is a tremendous initiative. Rain garden and workers. This is being done through permeable paving projects, installing water inlets in curbs for street trees, rain gardens and more. If you actually go and walk around your local council area, you'll see that there really is some tremendous thought that's being put into some of these public spaces. This is Burnside Urban's Forest Interactive, and there's a few cheers from the City of Burnside. Thanks for coming, City of Burnside. The City of Burnside Urban Forest Interactive is an exciting new website communicating the benefits of the urban forest through the utilisation of council data collected on over 40,000 public street and park trees. You can explore the urban forest using the interactive map to view individual tree data throughout Burnside, including tree species, age, height, environmental benefits and more. I did try to get them to do an agapanthus count, but they refused, unfortunately. Our next slide is the tree tag project. I love this one. This is so great for the kids. We all know the relief of finding a cool spot under a tree on a hot day. Trees are vital for our well-being as they provide shade, and they're just a great thing to have around. Councils are planting more trees to keep our towns and suburbs cool and livable. Through the Tree Tags project, they have calculated the value of some individual trees and are promoting their benefits to the community by placing this information on the trees. It's such a great way for kids to learn about the importance of trees. Our next slide is ask your councils. Ask your local council. I mean, you know, Tim was talking about this and Ken was talking about this. You all have to put some pressure on the people that make the decisions. I'm looking at some of my Unley councillors down the front. You all have to put pressure on them to do the right thing. It's so important. Also too, find out the great things that our councils are doing. Often they're just going under the radar, doing these amazing things, and we know nothing at all about it. So if you do care about your environment, if you care about where you live and how you live, contact your council and see how you can get involved to help them out. There are a lot of initiatives that you can get involved in. We've got some events coming up in February, the cities of Adelaide and Unley, and you can participate in a citizen science and measure to measure the heat in our streets, which I think is a great project. If you own a business and you would like to know more about protecting your business in an emergency, you can come along to the City of Adelaide Risky Business event. Unfortunately, Tom Cruise is not available to attend. Our March events, Climate Ready Forum, is an event organised and led from community members who want to help others become climate ready. This is at the heart of what you do, Rose. Go to the Red Cross stall for more information on this. It's wonderful. And you can learn more about shaping Adelaide into a greener, cooler city. You can attend this event and find out more at the Water Sensitive SA stall. Also, sign up if you've got some time on your hands. Why don't you sign up for a Red Cross volunteer? And of course, you can get Telecross ready and you can download the Prepared app. You can become an SES volunteer. If you've got a particular love of high-vis clothing, this is where you want to be. They are always on the lookout for people who want to assist in any capacity, and some of their roles are more active, some of them too are just behind the scenes doing more administrative roles. Get involved with the SES, a tremendous organisation. SA Health has a whole suite of useful resources on their website too, plus follow them on social media for catchy and clever tips. You can build and design. This is stuff that's really important. Ken spoke about this a lot. Pick up a copy of the Adelaide Sustainability Building Network's Green Book. Check out their resources online as well as Water Sensitive SA. You'll find practical information to help you make better decisions to make your home more comfortable and climate ready. Australian Business Energy, this is Business SA. They offer a free energy bill comparison and switching service for business and home accounts. So that is a tremendous thing. Carbon Neutral Adelaide. You can become a partner through the City of Adelaide and learn how to reduce your emissions. You can, tonight before you leave, we urge you to go and check out all of our stalls here tonight where you can find out more information about all of those initiatives and much more. A lot of questions came in. Obviously, we ran out of time here tonight. Those questions will be collated. We will be asking some of our panellists to answer some of those questions, and we will be distributing that information via the Your Say. So we will get that information out to you. Before I go tonight and before we conclude it, obviously I would like to have you all sit here for a moment while we do a huge thank you to our panel members who have all given up their time here tonight. Tremendous work, and it gives us all such confidence that there are such magnificent people behind the scenes lobbying government, trying to build better houses, taking care of the sick and the poor and the vulnerable, getting out there in high-vis clothing and chopping down trees. And Frank, you and your batteries and everything else that you've got going on, you're magnificent. So thank you all so much for the work that you've done. I personally would just like to thank two young women who have really put their heart and soul into this event tonight. So ladies and gents, I know there's been a big event team behind this event, obviously, and I'd like to thank everyone that's been involved, but personally, could I thank Beck Taylor and Natalie Iglio, please? And we've got a round of... I would just just also like to thank the volunteers, which are mostly staff from the partnering councils, all of those 8 councils that are involved. Thank you so much for joining up. It really is quite a collaborative place, and I think that is absolutely wonderful because, as all of our panellists have said, we need a collaborative approach to this big issue indeed. I also would just like to thank the Adelaide Sustainability Program who have funded this event, and most importantly, I'd really like to thank you guys for coming tonight because you're here to try and make a difference, and without people like you, we won't get anywhere. So thank you so much for coming here tonight. Before you leave, it's now incumbent upon you to fill out the other side of your form if you can. That's the one that says fill out after the event. So if you can now fill that out, stay cool. Thank you very much, and I really hope that you've enjoyed feeling hot, hot, hot. Thank you very much.